الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على من بعث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. صوت السلام عليكم. Is it sound clear? Yeah. So we carry on with the Tafsir of surah Nisa from ayah number 65 this week, inshallah. The theme of this ayah continues with the theme from last week, from 64. Last week the theme was of that ayah, 64, was around the purpose of sending messengers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He has not sent messengers except to be obeyed. He has not sent messengers except to be obeyed. So the purpose of sending messengers, alayhim as-salam, is that they are to be followed and obeyed and to be surrendered to in terms of the guidance they bring from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in terms of guidance for everyday life, whether it's in ritual worship or in other aspects of life in which Islam has provided guidance, or whichever laws that the prophets bring, that there is guidance. The main purpose of sending the messengers, is that they are to be obeyed. And we talked about the contextual situation around that ayah, which was the case of somebody who claimed to be a Muslim but in fact was hiding their hypocrisy. And this was exposed when it came to deciding on a case between this person and another person. Instead of going to the Prophet ﷺ, they went to somebody else, not even from the own community, not even from the Muslim community. They went to somebody else to seek a judgment, a hukm, in a matter with regards to which there is already, number one, the Prophet ﷺ, he's alive, he's in the community. If you're a believer, you don't leave the Prophet ﷺ and go somewhere else for guidance on a case or an issue, which also shows that Islam and Deen, these things are comprehensive. They're not just for, the issue was nothing to do with salah or zakah or fasting. It was to do with a dispute between two individuals, perhaps over some property or something. So that ayah was reminding people that the quality consequence of faith is that you refer to the Prophet ﷺ for judgment, for deciding your case, etc. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rebuked those who chose not to do that, right? So this ayah is connected with that theme. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this ayah, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فلا وربك لا يؤمنون حتى يحكموك فيما شجر بينهم ثم لا يجدوا في أنفسهم حرجا ثم لا يجدوا في أنفسهم حرجا مما قضيت ويسلموا تسليما. But no, by your Lord, they will never be true believers until they accept you, meaning the Prophet ﷺ, as the judge in their disputes and find no resistance within themselves against your decision and submit wholeheartedly. So this is like a more of a conclusive statement about when you do not make the Prophet ﷺ your judge in affairs, and when you do not accept his judgment sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the affairs wholeheartedly and you don't submit to it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will go into the ayah, is saying he is swearing by qasam, by your Lord. He's saying by Allah, by your Lord, to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They will never be true believers until they accept you as a judge in their affairs. So he's connecting again, Iman, part of Iman is to surrender to the judgment of the Prophet ﷺ, especially when he was alive, and surrender to the guidance of Sharia, of Islam, of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, of the guidance contained in the laws of Islam, to submit and surrender wholeheartedly. This is the sign of Iman. And you cannot have proper, true Iman if we don't surrender to the guidance in Islam, if we don't surrender to the judgments that the Prophet ﷺ made, or the rulings he gave, especially when he's alive, and equally after his death, alayhi salam, by following his guidance, the Sharia, Islamic guidance, was contained in the Qur'an and Hadith. So one of the clear principles here is that the Mufassirun say that every single one who claims Iman, who claims faith, everyone claims faith. You go to any Muslim and you say, do you believe in Allah and His Messenger? Every single Muslim will say, of course, yes. Right? So this statement is that everyone who claims to have Iman, I have faith in Allah, I believe in Allah, I believe in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They're saying that everyone who claims this, their Iman is not true unless and until they accept the hukum, the judgment of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You cannot have Iman, your Iman cannot be true, you may claim it, until you accept the judgment of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And not only accept it, you surrender, submit to it completely, with satisfaction, with the acceptance, right? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this statement in this ayah, فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لا يؤمنون حتى يحكموك فيما شجر بينهم ثم لا يجدوا في أنفسهم حرجا مما قضيت ويسلموا تسليما. First point is to make the Prophet ﷺ the judge in your affairs. That's the first thing. So point of reference. Who do you go to? What is the criterion? What is your source of guidance? You go to the Prophet ﷺ. The second thing, whatever he decides in your case, especially with regards to the issue at hand, whatever he decides with regards to your case, yes, you refer to him, that's the first step. But then whatever he decides, you find no haraj, you find no issue or problem or difficulty in yourself to surrender to it wholeheartedly. You accept it completely and submit to it. Right? This is what this ayah is saying. So there's two, what is this ayah responding to? As I mentioned, the previous ayah last week, that incident which I talked about. Also some of the tafsir books mention another reason or another situation with which this ayah connects to or is applicable to, or it was revealed at that time, is another case between one of the Sahabi, I think it was Jubair radiallahu an, who came to the Prophet ﷺ with a dispute with somebody else, with another Sahaba. And this was, I didn't write his name down. He was related to the Prophet ﷺ. One of the Sahabi, he was related to the Prophet ﷺ. It was his cousin. And the other Sahabi was not related to the Prophet ﷺ. They had a dispute between sharing irrigation waterway between their lands. The water used to pass through the Sahabi who was connected, who was the relative of the Prophet ﷺ. So when the Prophet ﷺ gave the judgment, he said, one day you use it, once you've used it to his cousin or relative, once you've used it because the water is passing through your land, next day leave the water for your neighbor, the other Sahabi. He will use it after you've used it. So the other Sahabi, he was happy with it, but he made a comment. He said something like, is it because, he's your cousin, something like that. He tried to hint that, did you give that judgment that he uses it first? Is it because he's related to you or he's your cousin? And the Prophet's face turned red. Face changed, color changed immediately. The Prophet never does injustice to anybody. Even if it's his cousin, relative, he will not give something. In fact, he will give others more than his own family. So he was really upset with that comment, and his face changed, the color changed on his face. Then he made it even more difficult for the other Sahaba. He said, okay, then you're not agreed with this. He made it even more difficult. He said, after he's finished, after 2 days, something like that, then you will get your chance. So he made it even more difficult because he wasn't happy with the first judgment, which was fair. And then they said that in relation to this ayah was revealed. That until you make the Prophet ﷺ your judge, and not only make the judge, then you have to be happy and satisfied with his hukum, with his judgment. So some people said this is not some people, this is accurate, this is Sahih, this incident is in Bukhari. So they said this is one of the occasion of revelation. So some people may ask, how can it be this same ayah, or the previous ayah as well, is related to this incident as well as the previous incident which we talked about in the past. As I mentioned before many times, Asbab al-Nuzul, occasions of revelation in the tafsir books, when they say this ayah was revealed regarding this incident, it doesn't mean it was only revealed about this one incident. It could be these incidences happened very close in time, and then the ayah was revealed, and it applies to both the incidences. Secondly, there's a general principle in the Qur'an that the occasion of revelation, right? Whatever it's been revealed for, that's what they call the sabab of nuzul. This is for a khas, for a specific incident. But they said the general principle is every ayah that's revealed for a specific incident is applicable generally at all times, in all places. So even if it's revealed about this incident, the principles remain applicable to all people. So they said, okay, well, the Prophet is not alive now. So they said, you implement it by following the Sharia, the guidance, the rules, the laws given in the Qur'an, in the Sunnah of the Prophet. That's how you make him the judge, and you submit to that. Just in terms of some of the words used, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this ayah, فِيمَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُمْ, like they don't have true iman until they make you the judge in those things that you dispute. فِيمَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُمْ. Shajara comes from the same root letters as the word for tree. Shajara is tree, right? Shajar is tree, and it means also something that is mixed up, intertwined. Yeah? So when you see a tree, its branches are intertwined, mixed up, all like this. So they use the same word for dispute, because the words and the two people, they're in conflict, they're intertwined. You know, it's not clear. You have to pull it apart, right? It's an argument. This is why they said, this is the word also for tanaza'u. Yeah, إذا تنازع. Yeah, when you dispute, when you have an argument, it's also, they call it shajara, the verb. التداخل والاختلاط, to intertwine with each other. And then in the ayah it also mentions the word فيما شجر بينهم ثم لا يجدوا في أنفسهم حرجا. Haraja is to be constricted. Haraj is ضيقا وشكا, to be constricted, find it difficult in your heart to accept something. Your heart is narrowed, is tight, your chest becomes tight, and you have doubt, you have shak, right? So you will not believe until the hukum, the ruling of the Prophet ﷺ, you go to it, but then you find no constriction in your heart. You find no difficulty in your heart. You find, and this is very important, I'll come back to later, especially in contemporary times. You find no difficulty in your heart, and you have no doubts. There's no shak. You don't say, how could that be? That sounds a bit unfair, doesn't it? In Islam, this rule. There's so many rules I can mention. Rule X. Some people might say, but why is that? Why is that? Isn't that unfair to so and so? Isn't that unfair to women? Isn't that unfair to the husband? Isn't that unfair to the wife? Isn't that unfair to the sons or daughters in the inheritance? These are the whispers, these are the thinking that might come. But here the ayah is making it very clear. You don't have true belief unless you accept it willingly, you find no difficulty in your heart, and you find no doubts in your heart. This is the true believer. Because when you say, isn't this unfair, or this sounds unfair, what are you saying? You're saying you've got more justice than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're saying you have more knowledge about what is fair, what is unfair, what is just, what is maslaha, what is beneficial for the human being, for the family, for the community, for the society. You have more knowledge with your small, finite, limited experience and brain than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's all-knower of the unseen, everything, and He created everything. I mean, it's stupidity, it's foolishness when people say, this sounds unfair. I mean, we have to differentiate between what is actual Islamic ruling or guidance on something and what is perhaps an interpretation or a fatwa given at a specific time and place, or even what is a mistaken fatwa or a wrong fatwa, or what is not applied properly from Sharia to a given case. Those things may indeed be unfair, may indeed be unjust. Like Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he said, every hukum that the faqih gives, right, or every fatwa that the mufti gives, that contains injustice, dhulm, right, unfairness, discrimination. He mentioned a couple of things. He said this is not from the Sharia. So yes, fuqaha, muftis, when they apply something, it could be that they haven't checked either the case properly, or they haven't checked the ruling in Sharia properly. They haven't checked maybe other opinions or the most appropriate opinion for that case. That's different. There, someone can complain. Someone can say, is this really what Sharia says, or let's check. That's not a problem. Well, once something is very clear and there's no mistake in it, and this is from the guidance of Islam, here, this is what we're talking about. You find no haraj in your heart, there's no constriction. نعم حكم عام. Yeah. لا لا. The sabab, sabab النزول, sabab خاص للحادثة معين, يعني something happened ولكن حكم عام. Because that's the principle. They say al-hukum al-ibra bi umum al-lafz. Yeah. So here in this ayah, in its meaning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, is saying to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that what we have revealed to you about these munafiqun, the hypocrites, is that they will not truly believe. Their iman, their claim of iman is not true. It's not haqq, right? It's not an iman that Allah will accept. It is not a claim to faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept. Why? Because they are not accepting you as their judge, and they're not surrendering or submitting to you and to the hukum that you give. Right? So, as you can see on this issue, a believer's criterion, this is very important generally, especially now times, contemporary times. People are not living obviously in Muslim societies or in Islamic societies. The world has changed, right? Most of the countries, Muslim countries, they're not living by their political system or their legal system. May have some connection to Islam, but it's not based on Islamic guidance. So in these societies, lots of different ideologies are there, lots of different ways of living, lots of different criterion for what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, what is ethical, what is unethical. The question is, who do people go to? Which ideology, way of thinking, which, philosopher, political thinker, or just what is the source of reference? What is the criteria you use to say this is right, this is wrong? That's the question in the ayah. The believers, Muslims, and any followers of all prophets, they've been commanded to make revelation guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through all of the messengers in the previous messages, previous books for their followers. And for us, the Qur'an and the Sunnah, we have to make that the criterion. That has to be the criterion generically for what is right, wrong, good, bad. Not just how to pray zakah, fasting. No, generally, ethically, morally, what is right, what is wrong. We cannot arrive at those things just simply based on our intellect. The rational mind, which obviously historically in the West, the Enlightenment and modernity, this is the break that they had historically. They said, we're going to ditch tradition, superstition, religious guidance. We're going to work things out for ourselves. We're not going to follow what we're told through some religious book or religious figure, or even superstitions. We're going to follow what we can observe, what we can think intellectually, use our mind, what is right and wrong. We can make a judgment. That's basically the Enlightenment and modernity, is to give the power of judgment, of discovering what is good or bad, right and wrong, to the human being, to the individual, and mainly the intellectual faculties. But in reality, what happens is, intellectual faculties are limited. You don't know all the variables. How are you going to make if you read some of these philosophers, good effort, a lot of them, but if you read what they say on, they try, like say Immanuel Kant, tried to make some kind of theory of morality, right? How would you know something's right or wrong? And you read these theories and you laugh. You know, some of them are so silly, they're not applicable, right? Or it'll be so general, it has to apply to everyone, there's no exception. You know, nobody follows their theory. There's no society based on Immanuel Kant's theory of morals, or any of the philosophers' theory of morals. As human beings, we can't come up with this all-encompassing theory of what is right, what is wrong in so many different aspects of life. It's impossible. So, unfortunately, I mean, historically, that's a turn that the Western world took. Not just the West, the East followed as well. In most of the Muslim countries now, what is right and wrong, what is good or bad, what is acceptable is not based on the judgment of the Prophet ﷺ. It's not based on the judgment of the Qur'an. It is based on the mind. We know better. This is right, this is wrong, this is allowed, this is not allowed. It's based on culture, following other cultures. It's based on just the rational mind, but often it's personal whims. It's often personal desires, right? But for us as Muslims, and there's no conflict. People say, oh, you only follow Islam and your criteria is this, then how do you live in non-Muslim society? There's no conflict between that, because we obey, Muslims have to follow the laws in whichever society they live in. They be good citizens, follow the laws. The laws are not telling you to do something that is prohibited in your faith, right? But what we're saying in judging morals, what is right, what is wrong, what is good, bad, where does the criterion come from? If you're a believer, you claim faith with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then it comes from those sources. It comes from Allah and His Messenger. And the interpretation of the Qur'an and Sunnah by the ulama. Not everything is stated in the Qur'an and the Hadith. Things have to be extrapolated, or qiyas and other things. But generally for believers, so that's why you can't, in reality, if someone says, I don't know, I'm a Muslim Marxist, right? I'm a Muslim Marxist. I'm not picking on Marxism. It could be any ideology. That in itself, in a deeper level, is a contradiction. Why? Because the criterion of what is right and wrong, good and bad, is different in Islam than it is in Marxism. And so forth in other political ideologies or moral ideologies. It's a contradiction. You don't realize that. So yes, you can be activist, you want change, you want workers' rights, etc. But if you look deep down into what is their criterion for good and bad, right and wrong, it's all based on power relations. Everyone who's a capitalist, an owner of the means of production, the bourgeoisie, they are evil, they are bad, etc. So they have their criterion and it's fixed. This is how they judge. Same with any other ideology. They have their criterion for what is right and wrong. And Islam has its very clear criterion for what is right and wrong, and it's contradictory. So you have to be careful of ideologies which claim to promote a kind of vision for the world, and they have systems of morality or good and bad, because any political system has judgments on what is good or bad. And you will find often enough it contradicts with your own faith. So on any given issue, we must see things through the lens of Islam and Islamic guidance, so that we can see truth. Because after all, what is it you're trying to do? What is it that philosophers or political ideologues or these leaders, what are they trying to do? They will claim we're trying to produce or create the best society where there's justice, there's freedom, etc., etc. But the best society is not going to come by following falsehood. It's not going to come by following your own personal desires. It will only come through following what is true. That's true of any human endeavor. That's true of living life as a human being on this earth. We have to follow the truth, right? we as Muslims, we need to see and judge the truth by the criterion given by our faith. And we have to avoid falsehoods. We have to avoid falsehoods. Otherwise, you get into the mess that we are in now, where there's no agreement on many, many issues. The culture wars, about identity issues and other things related, whether it's in economics, whether it's in social relations, whether it's in psychology, what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. That criteria, that distinguishing criteria that sets it out, we have to see it through the lens of Islam. This is very important. A lot of people, unfortunately, fall into that trap. It's not just in the West, it's in Muslim countries as well. People are attached to ways of life, political parties, ideologies, which clearly contradict Islamic guidance. This is throughout the Muslim world, it's there. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, you do not have faith that will be acceptable to me. Your iman is not acceptable to me, Allah is saying, until you make the Prophet ﷺ, meaning until you make Islamic guidance, Sharia, your reference, your judge. And not only that, you accept it 100%. You accept it without any problems. So that's the principle this brother was asking. Al-ibra bi'umum al-lafz la bi khusus al-sabab. You go with the generality, the principle of the words, not the specific occasion of revelation. And this is the majority of scholars say that about the ayahs. So then, in summary, one of the mufassirs, they summarized the kind of lesson in this ayah. He says that if you reflect on this ayah, you will see that the believer, he cannot have true iman, complete iman, unless there are three characteristics in him. Unless there are three characteristics in him. The first one, that he goes to the Prophet ﷺ for judgment if he was living in his lifetime. Or he goes to the Sharia after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, he goes to the guidance of the Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Sharia. So that's the first characteristic of a true believer. The second one is that he accepts it. He accepts the judgment of Sharia, right? And the judgment of what the Prophet ﷺ came with. But he accepts it in a way with rida, satisfaction. He's pleased with the judgment. It's not just referring. You refer, you go, but then whatever the hukum is, we accept bi rida. Yeah? And with yaqeen, complete yaqeen, that whatever the judgment that Islam has given on this matter, it is both haqq and adl. It is the truth and it is justice. There is no one more just than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Obviously, it's impossible that somebody is more just than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's impossible. It doesn't even come in the mind. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you have to believe in it truly, that this is just, this is true. That's why he said, ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُ فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَرَجًا مِمَّا قَضَيْتَ. He does not find in his self, in his chest, in his heart, haraj, no problems, no difficulty in accepting your judgment, the Prophet's judgment. So this is the internal acceptance, internal surrender. The third one, characteristic of the true believer, that he submits after he's happy with it, he's satisfied, he's pleased with the hukum, then he surrenders and submits. The third characteristic is that he submits, surrenders to the hukum to the judgment, to the guidance that the Prophet ﷺ has given, that has brought through the Sharia. And you see it in the external. The second characteristic was internal. You have no internal issues in your heart about it. You have no doubts. You're completely satisfied. You're happy with that judgment, knowing it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third one is, it shows physically as well, externally. في مظهره, externally you can see it. He surrenders to the hukum of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and by extension to Sharia. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا, meaning surrenders completely. وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. This is a type of tawqid with that word, which means that he surrenders completely, تَامًا. يَخْدَأُ خُضُوعًا تَامًا. So you have to have both surrenders, internally and externally, both. It's not just a hukum, I'll just do it, go to salah, I just do it inside, you're rushing, you're not satisfied, you think you're missing something, or some judgment, especially in cases where sometimes you might lose out, whether it's money-wise, something is haram, maybe it prevents your business from making extra money, right? Something is haram, prohibited, and inside you're in pain. If that was halal, I could have made an extra £5,000 a week, and you're troubled by it. You haven't, this ayah, this part, ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُ فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَرَجًا, you have not complied with this part, that you don't find any difficulty in your heart about the judgment. Yeah? And then if you don't surrender to it physically, you don't take the action, you don't stay away from the haram, that means you haven't surrendered externally either. وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا, you surrender. Same word for Islam, وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. Islam is to surrender. Islam is to surrender. So in this way, we see that this ayah is warning the believers that you do not go to other sources of guidance other than Sharia. But don't misunderstand. Sharia, Qur'an, Sunnah, interpretation by the Imams, the Mujtahidun, the true Fuqaha, Ulama, it doesn't pronounce a hukum on everything. There are many areas the Sharia, Islam, remains silent on. There are many things that Islam remains silent on. There you don't have to look for hukum from Sharia. You can use your own judgment. You can use the basic principles of Islam, as long as you're fair, just, etc., etc. There's many areas, it's left to you. You judge, you make a decision. If you see fit this way better, fine. Right? There's many areas like that. But in the areas where Sharia has given a pronouncement, Islam has given you guidance, clear guidance, in those matters, a true believer is warned not to leave that and go to some other criteria, some other philosophy, some other moral framework instead of Sharia. Because if you do that, then you have not surrendered, you don't have an iman that is acceptable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many people will claim iman on the Day of Judgment, but some will be accepted by Allah, some won't be accepted. Many people will claim they had faith. There's a faith that is acceptable to Allah, this is what we want. And there's a faith that is not acceptable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is, the overall summary of this ayah. Inshallah, we will stop here for today. If there's any questions, we can take, inshallah, before the end. Yes?
For the sisters, if they want to join our WhatsApp group,
Yeah.
with their name and number and security, you can create a sister only,
Okay.
and then they can take for the question.
Okay. So the brothers organizing the session are saying, for the sisters, if they can hear us, if you have any questions to ask, I know in the past people, the sisters said they've got questions. For now, for this week, if you can leave your details at the security reception in front of or at the back of Mariam Center, then we can add you to a sisters only WhatsApp group, and then you can send your questions there, inshallah, when we do the weekly session. Or we will try, inshallah, next week maybe put up the number for the WhatsApp on the screen to the sisters, or give it to a sister in the hall. That way they can have the number and join the group, inshallah. If there's any questions, barakallahu feek. Good question. The brother's asking, when you talked about hukum, ruling, judgment, what about like clothing, dress, the clothes you wear, cutting hair, etc., how you appear? Is that part of the hukum? Is that part of the ruling and judgment? So in customs, dress, clothing, the only part which is part of the hukum is, for example, in clothing, it will be to cover your awrah, to cover your nakedness. So what is nakedness? That will be defined by Islamic guidance, Sharia, right? That bit is part of the hukum, yes. The awrah is for men, this is the awrah for women, this is the hukum, Sharia, this is hukum Shari. But what type of clothes you wear, which color you wear, which type, as long as it covers the awrah, different cultures, different countries will wear different types of clothing. That's fine. This is not part of the hukum.
If I come to you and I told you, Akhi, the haircut you're doing, not from the Sharia. So if you're not happy with it, does that mean you're not happy with knowing Rasul and say al-qaza?
Good question.
I want to go.
Yeah, good question. So also haircuts. So if there's a specific type of haircut the Prophet ﷺ prohibited, if it's Sahih hadith, if the hukum is correct, yeah, I know.
So if I told you, is that what you're doing?
I'll come to it, yeah. So he's asking if there's a hadith on a specific type of haircut, right? Where the Prophet ﷺ prohibited making one side shaved or very short and leaving the hair on the other side, something like that, for example. The problem with that is interpretation. You said the word qaza. Now, what is that? People interpret in different ways. So there may be a hadith saying, don't do this. First rule, never ever go directly with one hadith and say this is haram. Number one, because hadith, you have to always check all the hadith on this issue. So if it's haircut or dress or something, any issue, the first thing you do, not you but the scholars will do, is check all the hadith on the issue, number one. Number two, then they will check which of these hadith is sahih, which is da'if, which is problematic. Once they establish that, then they will see the words and the meaning. What does it mean? There's many sahih hadith which the fuqaha, they came to two different conclusions. I give you an example. In the madhabs, they differed. If you are in ihram, can you do nikah? Can you conduct nikah in ihram? It's famous difference. There's hadith, sahih hadith, right? But they differ on the interpretation. One madhab said you can. The other said no, haram, you can't. Same two hadith they're referring to. Hijama in Ramadan, does it break your fast or not? Same hadith scholars looked at, they came with two opinions. So fixing first of all, is the hadith sahih or not, this is one issue. Then interpreting istikhraj al-hukm min al-hadith, to take out the hukum from the hadith, is another job. And I'm just simplifying. It's a big process. You have to check Qur'an verses, you have to check other principles, you have to check, is this nasikh, mansukh, is it abrogated or not, what is the practice, how did the Sahaba understand it, many things. So that's why you can't just say, if this brother doesn't accept this hadith, then he's gone against the hukum of the Prophet ﷺ. No, unless this is established, that this is sahih, everyone agreed upon this, and this understanding. Then if someone goes, like khamr, someone says, no, this is different understanding, interpretation in the ayah, no, that's not acceptable. This is known, yeah, ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura. This is known in the deen by necessity. Like khamr is haram or pork is haram. No one can dispute on these things. Similarly, if a hukum is coming from hadith, fine, as long as there's no different interpretation, ta'wil or ikhtilaf in the hukum. If there's agreement, one hukum, everyone agree, then someone says, I don't accept it or I find haraj, then problematic, yes. Okay?
It's very clear,
Barakallahu feekum. Okay, we'll stop here inshallah. If there's anyone new here to the tafsir, we have a WhatsApp group with Brother Khairul here. If you leave your number there, you can join the group. We send the recording, links for the recordings, and announcement for time changes, etc. inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.